Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dogs.
Welcome once again to the Gone to the Dogs podcast. This old gravelly voice belongs to Steve Fielder. I'm sure you know that by now if you've been one of my listeners. We're now recording our 80th or playing our 80th episode of the Gone to the Dogs podcast. It doesn't seem possible that we've logged that many so far, but it's been a great ride. I've enjoyed it all the way, and I think that you're going to especially enjoy today. You, the listener, and I are going to get to acquaint ourselves with our guest, a guy that when I first saw his writings on the Coon Hunting Conversations group page on Facebook, I said, hey, this guy's got things to say. I really enjoy it, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, I need to ask you, Chuck, for the correct pronunciation of your last name.
Yeah, it's not a real common name. It's Pew Dell, like pew, church pew that you sit in, and Dell computer. It's a Czechoslovakian name and not very common.
I got you. Well, I didn't want to call you Pudil or
most do,
or anything like that. Believe it or not, by my name, Fielder, you would think it's so common, like a right fielder in a baseball game, but I get all kinds of variations of that. Fielder, fiddler, Fiedler, all over. But so, Chuck, Pew Dell or Pudil?
Pew Dell.
Pew Dell. All right. We should have done that before we got started. But like I told you before we started this thing, Chuck, it's a very organic show. So we practice as we go. Well, Chuck, you became acquainted with the Coon Hunting Conversations group page when? Do you recall?
It's been over a year ago.
Okay. To give our listeners a little background, if you haven't participated in that page, I'm trying to think how many years ago it was that we started that page, and it's been something like maybe 5 years, 6. Time gets away. I do know that right now we have 10,610 members, or actually 15 members, to that group page on Facebook. It's a free deal. You have to join, and you have to answer 3 questions. I'm not going to tell you what those are, so you study before you go on. But we try to keep the people that really aren't interested in coon hunting out of it. So we ask them a few fundamental questions that any coon hunter would be able to answer. But I do know that in just checking today, that in the last 7 days, Chuck, think about this. In the last 7 days, we've had 7,746 active members on that website in the last 7 days. Now, of course,
wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And, of course, not all of them are contributing as you do, but they certainly are on there reading the post and so forth. And one thing I'm really fortunate to have Alan Bridges. He's from there in the same state you are. You live in Georgia, don't you?
I live in Alabama, work in Georgia.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, we want to get that bio on you here in just a second. But Alan Bridges lives over around Athens, Georgia. He'll tell you real quick he's a Bulldog fan. But he's the one that looks after the page. And every once in a while he has to put on his sheriff's badge. It is a conversational page, as the name implies. It's not for selling or buying. We do post announcements on there and so forth that we believe are of general interest to the readers. But anyway, Alan does a great job helping me kind of police the site. But Really, we have had very, very few problems. It's just a good place for coon hunters to go and to converse with other hunters and ask questions without getting jumped on by the keyboard commandos, so to speak, that are out there on the net. But Chuck, I noticed right away with your writing that you have, as I said before, good things to say, and I'm glad you're on there, and I'm glad that you're posting, and I'm really glad that you consented to come on to the podcast today. Would you mind giving my listeners a little bit of a bio, a background of who you are, what you do, how you got involved in the hounds, and just generally, get our members acquainted with you?
Okay. Grew up in southern Michigan, and I did not grow up in a very strong hunting and fishing family. I did a little bit of fishing, did no hunting growing up, but I had an intense desire to do it. So I did a lot of reading. I read anything I could get my hands on, was a big Jeff Cooper reader, some of the other sports at Field and Stream. And then any book I could get my hands on that had anything to do with hunting, trapping, and especially with dogs. One thing that's interesting, I had a little bookcase in my room, and in that bookcase was the book Where the Red Fern Grows. And on the cover of the book was a picture of a red fern. I assumed that the book was geared towards girls or something about ferns, flowers. I never touched the book,
Really?
which kind of missed me off to this day. But in sixth grade, I was not a very good student, and there was a little bookcase in my sixth grade class, and there was a book called Sounder about a young African-American kid that coon hunted. It was somewhat of a civil rights story, but he had a crossed up bulldog and redbone that him and his dad coon hunted with, and I was kind of intrigued. I probably read that book 20 times instead of doing my assignments.
Yeah. I haven't read the book, but I did see the film.
Yeah, and like all books and films, the book's better than the film. So I was, somewhat influenced by that. Grew up in a good, strong Christian environment. And in 1987, when I graduated high school, I joined the Army. And that's where I came down to Fort Benning, Georgia, did basic training, my infantry training, airborne school. And then I went to the Ranger Indoctrination Program and got stationed here with the 3rd Ranger Battalion. I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was a bit of an anomaly because I did not drink. I didn't go to clubs. I wasn't out carousing. And I did not like this place because it was very little for me to do. Right. But not long after being here, I got a guy entered my squad named David Rees, who's from Woodstock, Georgia, and he was pretty big into bass fishing, had done some tournament fishing, and went and did a few times of fishing off a bank with him. And then he bought a John boat, 12-foot John boat with a 28-pound thrust trolling motor, and we started fishing. And that's when I started liking it here. Started fishing the Chattahoochee and some of the little lakes around here. In '89, we were alerted and fought in Panama. And Dave ended up in very close range, got shot 3 times, lived to tell about it. He had a hole in his right shoulder big enough you could stick your fist in. He ended up getting out of the Army. And he called me up when he got back home. He said, "Hey, Pudil, come up here and get this John boat. I don't need it anymore." And so I went up and got that boat. And if I wasn't working, I lived in that boat. I fished about every chance I could get. Really learned to love being on the water down here. And ended up, had another fella ended up in my squad named Shannon McKinney, a Kansas boy, one of the toughest human beings I've ever met. And I had just gotten out of the Army Ranger School, and he said, "Hey, Chuck," he said, "get a rifle. We're going to deer hunt." I had no knowledge of deer hunting, had a desire to do it. So we went and got our hunter safety cards and started deer hunting. 5 minutes into my first deer hunt, I was able to shoot a little 6-point. So got where I was then as much into fishing or hunting as I was fishing. Ended up meeting my wife, my only wife, and started dating. She loved to fish. We did a lot of fishing together, and her dad was in a club in Alabama that deer hunted, and they hunted with dogs. And I'd never heard of such thing. I didn't know it was legal.
Let me interrupt you just a minute, Chuck. You said you were from southern Michigan. Now, I lived up there for 22 years. Where were you from up there?
Jackson.
Oh, okay. You were east of me then. I was over in the Kalamazoo area.
Okay, I used to wrestle over there.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yep.
The United Kennel Club headquarters is in Kalamazoo, and I worked for them for about full time, about 16 years. So yeah, I'm familiar with Jackson. There's a great ice cream parlor there in Jackson. We used to stop with, and you remember that?
Jackson All Star Dairy, and it was called Loudon Jackson's, and then Jackson All Star Dairy.
Absolutely. That's one thing I missed about Michigan. They had some of the best ice cream shops. Every little town seemed like it had one. Okay, well, that was a rabbit path. I took you down there. So.
Okay.
All right, well, go ahead.
Well, my father-in-law ran the deer dogs, and I ended up going with him as a guest a few times. And then I was an enlisted soldier in the Ranger Battalion, was a sergeant, and the Army offered me a scholarship. Said I could get out, go to college full time, go through college ROTC, and then I would, come back in as a commissioned officer. So I worked construction, went to school at Columbus State, and my father-in-law paid for me a membership to the deer club. And when I ran the deer dogs, I was on my way to fish one day, and I saw a hound dog, no collar on, run across the road. And I pulled over, called him. He came to me, and that became my first deer dog. I called him Oscar. And before I was done, I had, about 15 deer dogs in the backyard. And I enjoyed running the deer dogs. I enjoyed training them. But it was a kind of a pain in the backside because you would lose your dogs. They get killed on highways. And I did that for a number of years. And some may have read the story. It's in the one of the coon hunting magazines where I met a young African-American kid. I was walking through the projects. He walked out and said, "Hey, ain't you the hound dog man?" And young kid's name was Irvin, and one thing led to another. We started deer hunting together, and at the end of one season, he said, "Charlie, we should coon hunt." And I said, "What do you know about coon hunting?" He said, "Well, I watched the movie Where the Red Fern Grows, and if we coon hunt, we can do it year round." And so I said, "Okay, let's look into it." And I found a local dog jockey and bought a blue tick female that would run everything in the woods. And we knew absolutely nothing. We would turn that joker loose on Fort Benning, and we would follow it. Everywhere it went, we went. How we didn't get snake bit, eaten by gators, or permanently lost, I don't know. But I did that, a couple of months, and I about got tired of coon hunting because we never saw a raccoon. But I was deer hunting. I actually had got commissioned as a lieutenant in 95, was deer hunting, fell asleep in a deer stand because I'd been in the field all week and slept. Woke up, it was pitch black. And I said, well, I'm just going to sit here for a few minutes, see what I hear moving. And I heard a deep, just big old ball mouth, a couple of ridge lines over. And I started listening. I said, man, what a coyote. I listened again. I heard him open up. I said, that's not a coyote, that's a hound. And then I heard a kind of a more squealy mouth open up behind it. It was a black and tan female behind a blue tick. And I said, that's a coon hunter. So I got down out of my deer stand, ran to my truck, started listening. I drive down a ridgeline. I went down in the bottom, found a truck with a dog box, and I waited till the coon hunter come out. And that's my current coon hunt partner, the absolute best friend I've had in my life, Bobby Phillips. And we talked, and he invited me to coon hunt with him, and I was hooked. And I've been doing it on and off. Once the deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan really kicked in, I got out early 2000s. But when I retired in 17, I moved back down from Arkansas, back down to Georgia, Alabama area. I live over in Phoenix City, and I linked back up with Bobby, and we have gone back to hunt together and raising and training red bones and doing some competition hunting.
Well, I'm definitely going to have to stop by and see you on one of my trips. My listeners know that my running buddy is a guy that I met through UKC. He was a field rep when I was there. And his name is Arnold Nubbin Moore. We call him Nubbin. He's a black and tan man. He lives in Sterrett, Alabama, just kind of southeast of Birmingham. But I go right through Columbus, Georgia, and Phoenix City, Alabama there every time I go to Nubbin's, which is several times a year. So we're going to have to hook up sometime when I'm up that way.
I'd love to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I tell you, Chuck, you seem to have a lot of good hunting stories. I'm kind of interrupting you here, and I don't want to. Let's go back because I don't think we've gotten to the point where you got into some dogs of your own. of your own.
Okay. So when I retired as a lieutenant colonel out of Northwest Arkansas. I'd been the professor of military science up there. Left there. I did one more year in the Middle East, went back and retired. And I don't know, I just got an urge to hunt with dogs again, but I didn't really have the land to coon hunt. So I started dabbling in squirrel dogs, got a couple of little tree and feists and played with them. And I don't know, the itch hit me. They were nice, but they weren't hound dogs. So when I moved back down, I hunted with Bobby a few times, and I don't know why. I'd always had a like for the redbone. Can't explain it, but just did.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how I linked up, but I found a man in Missouri had a male dog direct out of the G-Man, and he was giving him away. I had a friend that was up there duck hunting, and he said, well, I can stop and pick up the hound. And he brought it down to me, and I hunted him. He was kind of on again, off again. I knew he wasn't going to suit me. Ended up giving him away. But the hunt started. I kind of decided up front, came up with a little mission statement, said, if I'm going to do this, I don't just want to hunt. I want to train, I want to breed, and I want to try to produce as good a red bones as anybody in the country.
Yeah.
I did some school teaching after I retired, and I was a science teacher, and I tried to somewhat take a scientific approach on looking at genetics. If I'm going to breed, what's going to be the best method. And most people look for a stud dog. As I was studying, I kind of decided I wanted dogs out of Moonlight Kate. And I knew she was a top 10 reproducer on the female side. Bobby found a male dog down in the panhandle of Florida out of Moonlight Kate, out of Aftershock. We rode down, and I was pretty, stoked about it. But the man pulled the dog out of the box, and he was in rough looking shape. He was wormy, ear infections, and he didn't look like much. He was kind of an ugly hound. Bobby gave $500 for him at 5 years old. And I said, this is, probably going to be a $500 shot. Well, we brought him back. I started treating his ear infections. And the first time I hunted him, I knew we had something, and got him back in good health. And I just liked the way he hunted, and decided that was going to be something I'd get some pups out of, and started looking for the right female. I went through a bunch of them, ended up with a Jericho female that I bred to, and had my first litter, which my Dottie female that I took fourth place just recently at the Georgia State on Saturday night is out of that cross.
Well, again, I'll interrupt you there, Chuck, but in my upbringing in West Virginia, at one time when I was a young hunter, especially after I came home from the Air Force, I did 4 years in the Air Force. I was in Japan 3 years. Came
awesome.
home.
Thanks for your service.
Oh, thank you for yours, for sure. And 1973 is when I came back home and spent about a 10-year period there and hunted a lot of pleasure hunting, a lot of competition hunting. And that was redbone country at that time. But the names that I would bring into the conversation would be older names that you've probably seen on some of the older pedigrees, but Blakesley's Northern Chief, Spoon River Andy, Bruce's Big John, Tucker's Ruby. These were all very, very well-known, popular redbone names back in those late 70s, early 80s. And so we had a lot of red dogs in my area there. And but anyway, so a little parallel there between our experiences. Yeah. Well, go right ahead with the story.
Okay. So once we got that first cross, then we just started looking for some more dogs. I really wanted to get a stud dog. They don't come cheap and they don't come easy. But I started interacting with a number of the more well-known red dog men in the country, and as luck would have it, I met Ricky Vickers up in Kentucky. He's got a real good, solid reputation as a hunter, and he ended up got a hold of me and said he had come across a couple of dogs that he was, looking at competition hunting, and he actually had more than he needed, and he had a good young red male, and asked if I was interested in hunting him. And so Bobby and I bought him. He's direct out of the Rocky Dog in out of the turkey dog on the bottom side. We call him Iceman. Matter of fact, we got a win out of him at the Georgia State. And
well, I'm sure our Redbone fanciers out there recognize these names immediately. And I'll confess, there was a time when I thought I knew all the popular stud dogs of all the breeds because, I was so involved with them, but certainly not all of them, but many of them. But these are all names that I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure my listeners that are Redbone people know exactly what you're or who you're talking about.
I think there's what you just mentioned is an interesting point. So when I got into coon hunting in the 90s, when I met Bobby was 95. And it wasn't long after meeting him that I subscribed to the Coonhound Bloodlines and the Cooner. And I would read those. Back then, those magazines were much thicker, and they were full from front to back with half-page, full-page, quarter-page stud dog ads.
Yes.
So even if you didn't hunt a breed, if you read those magazines, and I can still remember, you name the breed, and I can probably name a lot of the stud dogs from that breed from the 90s up until about 2000. Well, now people spend more time on social media, less time reading the magazines, and the magazines are not as thick and they don't have near as much the advertising.
Exactly.
So if you ask me right now, who are the top stud dogs in, whatever breed, I probably don't know it as well as I did, 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's for sure. And, there was a time when those magazines were our only means of communication.
True.
And we've often said on this podcast, the whole coonhound world waited for the November issue of the American Cooner magazine to come out because it would have the current ACHA world champion on the cover and the results of the ACHA World Championship. That was the only world championship in that day. And so news traveled much slower. Now it's at warp speed,
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't read it an hour ago, it's old news. Right?
I would read them cover to cover. I was a young lieutenant, got sent up to Fort Bragg, and I was going to coon hunt when I got there. No sooner did I get there, I got sent to Haiti doing peacekeeping kind of stuff for almost half a year. And my wife would mail me the coon hunting magazines, the various ones, and I would read them till I just about had them memorized. Just it was the only coon hunting I could get my teeth in right then.
Well, I'm sure many of our military can identify with that, Chuck. I spent 3 years in Japan with no coon hunting at all. All I had was the magazines, and it was during that time that I began to submit a few articles to Full Cry magazine, and they weren't good by any stretch. But, I just, that was a lifeline, to the sport. Of course, my dad was active hunting back home, and, his letters and all sustained, kept the fire burning, so to speak. But, Fort Bragg, I lived in Raleigh for a period when I retired at the American Kennel Club, so kind of know what that hunting's like a little bit. But
Fort Bragg was probably some of the toughest coon hunting I did, because when I got up there, it was my wife. She born and raised in Phoenix City, her first time ever being away from home. And we had bought a little house in a subdivision out in the country. And I wasn't gone a matter of weeks. A hurricane in 96 hit that area. She was without power for 16 days, no water. She had to kind of rough it. But when I came back and started hunting, that hurricane had laid pine trees down like pickup sticks all over post.
That might have been Hurricane Hugo that came up the coast up that way.
It was whichever one was in 96.
I can't remember the year for sure.
But it so when you would hunt, those coons could get up on them, felled, knocked down pine trees, and they're running 3-4 feet off the ground, and they just get a good dog struggled because it was just. And then once you had a dog tree, getting from the road to the tree was took an act of Congress, because there was so much, trees down and briars growing up where there was, now sunlight. So Bragg was some tough hunting for me.
Oh, I bet. So you got that pretty much established you as a Redbone man.
Yeah, actually, I hunted dogs for a fella out of Waycross, Russell Lee, good man. I hunted some for him for a while. I didn't have the money right then for my own, high dollar dog. So I just kind of became a handler, and I earned a reputation as a pretty solid dog trainer, and had a couple of guys I was hunting for. But I found at that time getting my hands on a good red dog was hard. I think I had two of them. The Red Hot Dusty dog, I think he either won or finished real high in the Purina points back in the late 90s. Ronnie Copeland ended up with him. He was the first red dog I ever trained, and I ended up got him back to Russell. He grand nighted him out, and then Ronnie got him. And I had another dog. He ended up in Texas. But after that, I started hunting walkers. I had a PKC Silver Champion walker dog that I hunted and did a little competition hunting with for a man named Glenn Rogers. Glenn has since, he's in his 70s now, got out of coon hunting. He's got back into squirrel dogs, and he owns the 2020 Festus, who's world champion squirrel dog, one of the cur dogs, mountain cur, I think it is. But so I handled dogs. I ended up more English and walkers than I was red bones, and I almost came to the conclusion I wasn't gonna be able to get a good red bone. And I don't know. I guess some of the red bone breeders did their homework, because when I got back into this, I actually found it easier to get good red dogs. So, the guys like Wade Coons and Ricky Vickers and, some of the other breeders nationally have done, Royce Taylor and some of those have gotten a pretty good solid line of hunting red dogs that you can pick from now.
Well, you mentioned Royce, and that's a name that I recall very vividly from my days. When I was in the UKC registry, there were quite a few redbone people. Harry O'Median from Michigan, for instance.
He's been very helpful to me. Harry's been definitely helpful.
Yeah, Harry's a super guy. Danny Biggert over in Ohio, Dwayne Bruff, on and on and on. We had a field rep named Fred Lubert. A frequent guest on this podcast is Fred Moran, the redbone man. Have you ever talked to Fred?
I've never spoke to him personally.
Yeah, he's a great guy, about 85 now, I think, and still coon hunts almost every night, sometimes by himself. So he's quite the character. All right. Well, there's a couple things that I want to talk to you about. Number one, you obviously, you talked about being in school and not being a good student. Somewhere along the line, you learned to be a wordsmith. You learned to write. Was that Uncle Sam that taught you that, or was that just something you picked up through your? I was always a voracious reader myself. I used to laugh about reading the cereal box at the breakfast table in the mornings, anything I could get my hands on. And then I, got into writing when I went to the United Kennel Club. They had a column there from the field operations department called Coon Talk. And I was told when I was hired in there in 1983 that would be my responsibility. So from that start is how I got involved in writing. And, it's been kind of my life's work. How'd that all begin for you?
It's interesting because when I was a young student, elementary up through middle school, I was definitely a poor student. Of all my brothers and sisters, I was the dumbest by far. But I didn't mind writing, but it seemed like every time I wrote, I didn't get very, very solid grades. So that kind of turned me off. One thing I did pick up, I had my grandfather on my dad's side was a World War II vet. He was a phenomenal storyteller, kind of like a northern Jerry Clower, if you will. Mm-hmm. Just told a lot and he had a lot of hunting and fishing kind of stories of, goofy things he did in the Army. And I kind of adopted his storytelling. So I always liked telling stories. But then when I got the scholarship, I remember in the second English class, the mandatory English class I had, I got scuffed up on a few of my early papers, and then something kind of clicked like, okay, read this English book and, get a little better on your grammar and sentence structure. Applied that. And then as an officer in the Army, as you start turning up, you have to do the professional writing. You got to write reports and everything from awards and all that. And as time went on, I learned a little bit of the Army writing style, the more professional. Mm-hmm. It got okay. I could hold my own. when I was on my way to Iraq in 2007, I was going to run a counterinsurgency team. They called them MIT teams. And General Petraeus came and spoke to a whole group. And he kind of drew a parallel. He said, we lost in Vietnam, not because we got outmatched on the battlefield. We lost in Vietnam because we lost at home. We lost the will to fight. And he said, one of your jobs is to keep the people at home without violating, operational security. Keep them involved in what the good stories are. Tell people what you're doing and tell them the good stories. So I came up with it was kind of a distro list, just a list of names of emails of people back home, people that I went to church with, family members, and I would write a monthly kind of an update of what I was doing on the ground in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And it kind of took the storytelling from my grandfather to just writing. And it surprised me that it got more attention than I expected. People really liked it. They wanted other people to get added. So I did the same thing in Afghanistan. And, as years went on, then Facebook showed up and I just started writing small stories. And I try to write some things of a scientific nature, some things of a comical nature, and some of a more instructional. And I guess to my surprise, because I still don't consider myself a good writer, but I've gotten probably more compliments and encouragement than I ever expected.
Well, the first of your stories that really drew my attention, and you mentioned this earlier here, is the stories about the young man there, that young African-American kid, I guess he was at the time that you met him, and those adventures, and it kind of reminded me of the old man and the kid, or the old man and the boy, the Ruark stories there from North Carolina. I don't know if you've ever read any of those, but
I have.
It's always good, I think. I included a chapter or an essay in my book, Gone to the Dogs, A Coon Hunter's Journey. We'll put a shameless plug in there for that, called Too Old to Quit. And it was about an elderly hunter and his grandson. And it was a fictional piece, but, with a hook in it. And I enjoyed writing that because my own grandfathers were not coon hunters, and both of them passed when I was, I was 6 years old when my dad's father died, and a little older, probably 8 or 9 when my mother's father died. So I really didn't have much contact with my grandfathers, but I enjoy that connection, and those were some really good stories that you did, and that's what first attracted me to your writing.
I appreciate it. Well, one of the ironies, or that kind of funny how it worked out. So when I met Bobby would have been, I'm 54. He was younger than I am now. He's probably in his later 40s. And he told the story. It's been a few years. He was, I think, because I asked him, did your dad coon hunt? He said, no. I said, well, how did you get into it? He was 10 or 11 years old at a store and saw some dogs, I believe. And it was a middle-aged, elderly African-American gentleman, black gentleman. And so you're talking back in it'd been late 1950s. And he talked to the man about his dogs. And the man said, I know your dad. If your parents will let you hunt, I'll come pick you up and you can coon hunt with me. And Bobby talks about him today. You'd think it happened yesterday, about a man named Uncle Charlie Kroll. And he said, Charlie Kroll always referred to him, his kid, as Captain Bob. And he said, that's who he learned to coon hunt with. He said, on the weekends, he hunted all night long. You didn't get to hunt during the week, but he hunted all the way up into his, later 20s with Uncle Charlie. And Bobby can to this day, he'll tell you about, he said back then they weren't registered dogs. It'd be a half bird dog and half hound dog. And he can tell you the dog's name. He can tell you how he tracked. He can mimic how he sounded on a tree. And he'll tell the story how when his dogs got older, I think it was a man in Iowa that Uncle Charlie ordered a plot. And he said the beetles had just gotten big, and he named the plot Ringo. And what a dog! And he said from then on, Uncle Charlie was a plot man. But then years later, when I met Irvin, watching Bobby interact with Irvin, it's almost like he'd come full circle. That now he's middle aged and he's hunting with a young kid out of the projects and kind of returning the favor that was given to him, 40 years before.
How about that? Come
I
full
met
circle.
with. This was interesting too. So I had talked to Irvin. We lost contact with each other. I think I saw him right before I went to Afghanistan in 2009 or 10, and I ended up left. Was out in Arkansas for 8 years, and I tried finding him. I found where his mom had passed away. He went by a different name on social media. And so I finally linked back up with him and we went and talked. And I said, we've kind of got a unique story. I do a little writing for a hobby. Would you care if I, wrote our story? He said, by all means. So when I wrote it, I think it was the National Redbone Coonhound page that I shared it on first. And within days, it had over 2,000 shares. And Irvin literally cried. He said, I never expected that people would really, care about our story. And we met up. I was coming home from work. I was teaching then. And I met up and I said, here's what's interesting. I said, skin color never had anything to do with nothing. I said, if you would have been a young white kid and would have asked, to hunt or fish or whatever, I would have. I don't think it would have mattered to you if I was black. I said, but part of why that story has gained the attention it is because I'm white and you're black. And I said, we live in a day where there's those in the media that will definitely promote racism for the sake of promoting it. I said, what people don't tell is the good stories. That there are people that are great friends and have been. And I said, more of the good stories. And he laughed. He said, you're right. He said, be honest with you. He said, I didn't even as a kid think about the whole racial aspect of it. He said, now I kind of understand. But it's, it's interesting how that whole thing played out.
Well, it is, and I don't know why. I've always those kind of stories have always drawn me in. I love the writings of William Faulkner, and when I travel through northern Mississippi on my way over to the White River each year, and I go through some of those areas that he wrote about. Of course, they're vastly different from what it was back in the day. But you see that connection William had with the, in the hunting groups and Sam Fathers, I believe, was the name of the one character that was such a, he was like the dog man on the deer hunts in the big woods and all. And I don't know. You mentioned that book Sounder, which I do need to pick it up and read it, but I loved that movie. And there's just, when I first went to, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I'm just going to open my heart a little bit. When I first went to down through the low country of South Carolina, my first experience was on a Greyhound bus going from West Virginia as a college junior to Lakeland, Florida, to attend college there. And I went through that low country and I saw those sharecropper homes and I saw the cotton fields and I saw the bales of cotton and I saw back in those days in the mid 60s, I saw wagons loaded with cotton bales and things like that. There was just such romance to me about those people and their culture and their closeness to the land and all. I don't know. I've just always been. And there was another a fellow in my hometown in West Virginia, Leo Lars, worked on the railroad, was a coon hunter and always kept a great dog. And he would go to Central Virginia every year and hunt with a black gentleman named Elwood Christian. And he would always bring back the stories of hunting with Mr. Christian and what a coon hunter he was and his stories that he told. And my good friend Johnny Brinkley in Tallahassee, Florida, has a good friend down there named Roosevelt. And he tells the stories that Roosevelt has shared with him and about Roosevelt. And those stories just always grab me. I don't, and I know it's not, like you say, skin color doesn't mean anything, but there is a culture there. There is a story there. There's a history there that just really, really gets close to me.
So you've touched on something that I've been working on a paper probably for 2 years. So, there's never wanting to offend, but I've worked as an advisor in the Middle East. I like getting into a culture that's not my own, whether it was the Iraqis, the Afghanis, the Peshmerga, whatever, in learning other cultures. It was a little surprising to me. So I lived in southern Michigan. I went to a fairly integrated school, not too far out of Detroit and all. But when you went out into the country was predominantly, it was white. Yeah. When I moved down here to the South and I began to travel around and look, you could go to a little small farming country town and it'd be 70% Black American.
Correct.
And you'd see a man that's a black man with a straw hat on a John Deere tractor and overalls. And so that kind of intrigued me. As I got into the coon hunting, I'm a minority as a coon hunter around here. The majority of the coon hunters I know in this area, Jimmy Lee, Tom Jackson, Ricky Hawkins, most of them are African Americans.
I see.
And it's interesting because when you read the coonhound magazines, you don't see a lot about that. And almost, I said, I got to find the title, The Unsung Houndsman of the Deep South Swamps, is that there's a relation between white and black coon hunters. There's a friendship.
Yes.
They hunt the same lines of dogs. And I do believe that a lot of the African American hunters are more meat hunters. They keep what they tree and they eat what they tree.
Yes.
But they are a training ground for competition hunters. There's competition hunters will put the dogs in the hands of people. And when a dog is of a certain caliber, they'll buy those dogs back. And so there's a working relationship and there's a crossing of cultures. It's one of those, I want to write a paper. I want to either that or maybe do it like a YouTube, but I don't want to offend anybody and do it wrong. So it's something, if I do it, I want to do it right.
Well, since we're on this subject, and I think it's very interesting, and again, truthfully saying it's been something that's always interested me. When I was with the PKC organization, there was a gentleman, and his name escapes me right now. He was from Atlanta. He was a black gentleman. He had some really nice dogs that he entered in competition in PKC. I don't believe he handled the dogs himself, but he approached me in a restaurant one day in Thomasville, Georgia, where we were there for the PKC Sunshine Jamboree. And he said, "Steve, I believe you could be the voice that could bridge the gap between the black hunters and the white hunters, so to speak. And not that there was really a gap there, but that I think he was wanting me to approach it more from the standpoint of encouraging the black hunters to be more involved, to be, because certainly there were several when I was in PKC that were involved. And boy, my memory has gone. I used to pride myself, Chuck, in being able to remember names. And if I walked into a big room of coon hunters, I could almost walk around and, call everybody by name. Those days are gone. I mean, it'll come back around to me. KD Knox and his boy, and I know listeners, and I can't remember his name right now. They were from Florida, coon hunters. Laronia Allen hunted a good dog named Undertaker, and I judged and hunted with Laronia many times. Just so many, but I wish I could remember this guy's name, but he would probably applaud what you're doing with your research there and would encourage you to write that book or whatever. Because certainly The thing about coon hunting, it's an American sport. It was founded here, and certainly it was a sport of the rural community. And unfortunately, we didn't get, because of communication being what it was, we didn't get to hear a lot of these stories. And man, what a book that would be, to be able to read the stories of so many of these, famous black coon hunters. Kind of like I relate it to the story of the Negro Baseball League.
Yep.
The fantastic players that were involved, and the Jackie Robinson story and all that. So anyway, I don't know how we got off on that, but I'm glad we did, because that's a subject that's pretty near and dear to me.
Well, I think, and that's across the board. One of the things that struck me out is there's a number of Facebook pages for coon hunting, some better than others, some breed specific. I think complimented you, not blowing smoke, but the one you run is the best one out there. Most people post a picture, post a meme, they don't write the stories, and encouraging other hunters to write the stories. I recently got involved with two kids. I was a 8th grade science teacher at a very impoverished public school in Columbus. It was the first year of doing public school teaching. And it was kind of an interesting story. I had a young man from Michigan. I didn't know he's from Michigan at the time. His dad died of a heroin overdose. And he ended up down here in a rough neighborhood. But he saw my dog box on my truck leaving school. And the next day, he saw me, said, "Hey, you coon hunt with blue ticks?" I'm thinking, well, how does this kid in an inner city school know anything about blue ticks? And I said, "No, I hunt with red bones. What do you know about coon hunting?" Well, he had done some competition hunting as a kid before his dad passed away and moved down here. But I had him, and then later he had a girlfriend. Last year, they coon hunted with me. And they said, "Well, we've seen that you've been on some podcasts, you're writing articles, and some of your stories are getting in magazines, and we want to be in a magazine." I said, "Well, you can do the work yourself." So they wrote their own stories. They wrote about coon hunting. The girl's an Afro-American girl. She wrote a great story. I helped edit it, send it back to her, made sure the edit, and we sent it into, there's a Southern Hound magazine, and they printed their story, and they're just tickled pink that they've got a story in a magazine.
I read that story. It was excellent.
Yep, Ariella. I think she did a great job telling the story, and she started coon hunting with me. They've moved back to Michigan and doing good up there. But they're a great young couple. And it's kind of, I'm dabbling right now. I've taught school for 5 years, and I absolutely love to teach. My master's is in education. There's probably not a job. I just, I'm not going to get political, but I could not deal with just the liberal nonsense from the principals. And I ended up,
your views are welcome here.
Well, I quit. We had an ordeal that happened. I was teaching junior ROTC, had gone from science teaching that. And there was just some real disrespect to, I think, the military, our program, our cadets. And I said, I can't be part of this, and walked away. But I don't want to quit being a teacher, whether I'm teaching in a public school. And one of the things I'm looking at doing now, and I'm trying to put it together, it was almost a tongue-in-cheek joke when Bobby said, if we're going to breed red bones, we got to name our kennel. And I had an old dog box, and I was messing around. I put "Beware of Wampus Cats" on the back of that dog box. I said, we're going to call them the Wampus Cat Red Bones. But I started taking some of these kids that are inner city. I don't care what color they are, some white, some black. It doesn't matter where they're from. And I'm introducing them to fishing and to hunting. So I run an 18-foot mud boat, and I take kids out that have never fished, and I let them run catfish noodles with me. And they love it. And then I get them to write about it. We have fish fries, and then I get some of them to coon hunt.
Awesome.
But I've got, about 10 or 15 kids. I want to, somehow formalize it a little bit more. I want to involve some other hunters and just get more kids that don't have the opportunity. Their dad doesn't hunt, their uncle doesn't hunt. And I think there's a lot of character teaching. I think there's a lot of, getting them away from the phone and the internet and some of the video games. But, as So I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I'm calling it the Wampus Cat Outdoor channel. I haven't really got it up and running, but I'm in the early stages. I got my camera and I'm setting it up. And that's one of the things I really want to showcase. I want to do breeding and training, but I also want to do hunting with kids and getting kids out that don't normally have a chance to do things like that.
Well, I couldn't applaud you enough for those efforts, and so vitally important. I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your definition of a wampus cat?
It's weird. I'd never heard that expression growing up. I had a teacher. He was my advisor, criminal justice. He grew up in Tennessee, and he was referencing the Jerry Clower story when, Shoot Up Amongst Us. And he said he was up there, the Wampus Cat. Well, I went up to him after class. I said, "What is a Wampus Cat?" He said, "Where I grew up in Tennessee," he said, "it's kind of like a mythical creature, like Bigfoot or Sasquatch." He said, "It's a mythical creature it's a cat and part person, and it comes out at night, and people tell Wampus Cat stories to kids." And I don't know, that term just always stuck with me, and I've used it now and again. And so
I've heard it all my life, but I did. Yeah, well, that's great. It's unusual and eye-catching for sure. Well, tell us a good story that maybe one that you've written about, or one that was particularly enjoyable to you of your experience. It can be from your military days. It can be from coon hunting there in Georgia, or maybe up in North Carolina, or what. You got something that you could share that you think our listeners would particularly enjoy?
Okay. Before I do that, I just want to say one thing. When I talked about hunting with kids, one thing I'll say is when you post things like that on Facebook and social media, what I have found across the board from the coon hunt community, when the coon hunters out there find out you're doing that, they will bend over backwards to help you. Bruce Simons over in East Georgia, there's just a number of them that they've put equipment in my hands. They really, if they know you're hunting with kids, they'll go the extra mile to help you out.
Yeah, and that that speaks well for our sport for sure. Coon hunters have always, they don't always get along. They get out on a night hunt. There can be disagreements and discussions. There can be at times jealousy or envy over who's got the better dog, and all these things. But when the chips are down and someone needs help, you will not find a more giving, generous, kind-hearted group than the coon hunting. I hate to call it a fraternity because there's a lot of women that are involved in it as well. But I have found that to be true for sure. Well, go ahead and.
Well, here's what I don't know how much I've shared this story. I was up at Fort Bragg. I had hunted a couple of years, and kind of got established up there. My buddy Bobby was, stayed in contact with him. This is long before really getting into internet, so I would call him regular. He was still hunting some blue dogs. Had his big blue dog named Jason that I've wrote about. I do not know how I came into knowledge, but I came into knowledge of a blue tick male that was for sale, and I wanted to try him. And I went and picked him up, and I got him on a trial. The dog's name was Rock. And the first thing I know, he was a very large hound. So I knew nothing of him. And I called a friend of mine named Ralph, who's up in Spring Lake or Lillington. I said, "I'm going to try a dog. You want to go?" And he said, okay. So he had a little English female he brought. Well, normally I would check what was open on post and what wasn't. I wasn't planning on hunting that night, so I didn't check what was open. I just figured I'm going to open it. So we went out. There's a creek runs north-south along the east side of Sicily Drop Zone, which is the biggest drop zone on Fort Bragg. It's where a majority of their airborne operations get started. So we turned the two dogs loose, sent them north on this jump and run creek, and it's a nasty area. It's just full of briars and brambles. And they got in there, I don't know, maybe 200-300 yards. His little female opened up. She was kind of squealy mouth, and that Rock dog opened up. And I've been hunting since 95, so I've got close to 30 years of doing this. From that day till this day, I have never in my life heard a dog that had a mouth like this dog. He didn't bawl, he roared. I mean, it was just a whoa. It rattled the trees. It was just mind-blowing loud. I thought, holy smokes. I have never heard a dog like that, and to this day have not. Well, as luck would have it, I like Ralph, and he was a good guy. Some of his dogs were a little trashy. I think this dog jumped on a fox because they left the creek heading straight to high ground. And unfortunately, the blue dog Rock was right there with her. Seconds later, I heard the unmistakable drone of C-141 Starlifters coming towards that drop zone. I was like, oh, no, they're getting ready to do a parachute jump. So here comes, I think it was like 3 or 4 of them flying trail formation. They fly about 1,200 feet across that drop zone. I didn't know at the time, they're doing a proficiency jump. One of the support units had to get a night jump in. So they bail out, and there's parachutes up in the air, the drone ejects, and they pass on by. And that female had already crossed that drop zone in the noise. Well, Rock was way behind her, and he started blue ticking along. He got up on that drop zone. I drove, and you could just hear this, oh, and he started tracking. Well, I could hear, there's the parachute, it's dark, but they're out there on that drop zone. And I heard somebody yell, excuse the language, what the hell is that? And I heard a female scream, and I could hear people running. Well, he's just following that track going through them. These people they're scared. They don't know what's coming at them. And Ralph said, you're either going to get court-martialed or arrested. And I said, we got to catch that dog. So I turned my little yellow parking lights on. Luckily for me, I had a white Chevy with black fender flares, just like the range control guys had. Excuse me. So I started driving across the drop zone, weaving in and out of parachutes and parachutes. I was like, oh, heavens, I'm going to get some colonel run up here, and he's going to have me. But I got across that drop zone. I caught that blue dog, and we got out of there, and I never heard anything about it. But I've always kind of laughed and said, that would have been probably 1998. So any of those soldiers out there, they're probably retired by now. They're probably in their mid to late 40s to 50s. And I'll bet they're still telling a story about whatever creature they thought was coming out of that swamp across that drop zone. Because I definitely don't think they thought it was a dog.
No, that's a great story, and I can only imagine what was going through your mind when you heard those aircraft coming over. Well, you knew what was going on, but
yeah, I should have cleared the area. We've and I've had dogs get out of pocket on posts and get into areas that there's training going on. I actually had I was on Fort Bragg, and I had a walker dog. He was treed. And he was 120 bark a minute tree dog. It was in the summertime, and I was trying to get to him, and he just quit treat. And that's before we had the GPSs. We had the old handheld trackers. Well, I didn't bring the tracker with me, and I could not find him. And I was like, that is not like him to pull a tree. And I ended up, I found 2 soldiers took a piece of parachute cord, and they had him on a leash. And I was like, hey, what are y'all doing? They said, well, we found this dog over there. I said, yeah, he's a hunting dog. He said, well, he wasn't hunting. He was just standing at a tree barking. And I said, well, that's what he's supposed to do. There was a raccoon in that tree. Like, no kidding. And,
well, that brings up a question for me. I know that do you have to be on active duty in order to get permission to hunt on those military bases?
Each one of these posts handles their hunting different. And I've been on, being close to 30 years in the military, I've been on quite a few of them. And I would say, hands down, Fort Benning is the easiest and the best one for hunting that I've seen. But the way Fort Benning is, you're either going to have to be retired military or active duty to hunt. And there's a little class you got to take. You got to get your Fort Benning hunt permit. And then there's a website you go on. It'll tell you what areas are open, what areas are closed. And then you can sign into up to 2 areas. And then when you're done hunting, you sign back out. But, back in the 90s when I was hunting here, it was an open post. So there were coon hunters that just slipped in and hunted. And it had a pretty sparse coon population. Where now, I only know of 2 coon hunters hunting this post, and I'm one of them. You have a much better population, and I count myself to be blessed because it's 200 square miles of property, and it's pretty good coon hunting.
Yeah, I'm sure. I always enjoy going through there with the towers, with the statues there at Fort Benning.
Yep.
On what is that, 280?
It is.
Yeah, and it's very, very impressive. And I think I mentioned to you when we were kind of planning this podcast that my dad was stationed there. He went in the Army in 1939, and his first tour overseas was in Iceland. He was in a combat engineers outfit, and they built airstrips and so forth. So he was fighting the Germans in the frost, and then at the end of the war, he was in New Guinea for a couple of years building airstrips out of coral and all, for that effort and all. He got home, and I believe in September of 1945 is when he got out. And, yeah, so.
Have you been to the new infantry museum on Fort Benning?
I have not. In fact, I need to stop there. I need to plan the next trip I do up that way is just plan some time there because I'm, blowing through, heading up to Nubbin's place, and we usually have got a coon hunting destination somewhere in mind, like Autumn Oaks or whatever. And so, but yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, so they've got, for years they've had the infantry museum, but they were kind of smart. They built the new museum is outside of the actual post itself. So you don't have to come through any gate. Anybody can go through it. And it's a little less of a normal museum where it's just a bunch of artifacts. It's kind of a experiential type of, so when you go in, you walk down a long corridor, and they call it the last 100 yards. And you literally go from, they got these life-size, very realistic looking statues. So you walk through one of the battles of the Revolutionary War, then up through the Civil War. It takes you through World War I, II, Korea, and then all the way up to the, Iraq and Afghanistan type. And, and then when you go through the museum, it's very well laid out, and you go from, a time period to a time period, these different wings off it. But it's a well-run museum, and it's definitely worth a stop for anybody that's in this vicinity. I would definitely encourage them to come here.
Well, I'm sure you can find it on. Where would we get information as to how to where to go?
Just go to Google and type Fort Benning Infantry Museum, which Fort Benning is about to be changed to Fort Moore here in a matter of weeks. But type Infantry Museum. That's one of my jobs right now. That I'm not a school teacher now. I'm working contracting and changing the name. Just changing all the signs is a monumental task itself.
Well, I would ask why, but I'm sure that would be
won't get political. So they've made the decision that every one of the southern posts that was named after a Confederate. So that's Fort Bragg, Fort Stewart, Fort Benning, Fort Lee, Fort Hood, Fort Polk. There's 6 right there. I think there's 8 total. They're all getting a name change. So history is what it is. I grew up, on Fort Benning, and would have personally liked to see it stay Fort Benning. But the one positive thing I'll say is changing it to Fort Moore. It's named after Hal Moore. And if you watch the movie We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson, based off the We Were Soldiers Once and Young by Hal Moore, he is an outstanding American. They named the post after him and his wife. Both outstanding Americans. He was a great soldier, a great leader, and a great American. So at least they're naming it after somebody worthwhile.
Sure. Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
Well, I'm sure. I'm sure. And I would, my good friend Al Metcalf. Have you met Al? He's from Georgia.
No, but I know the name. I see him online.
Yeah. He hunts. He has a potpourri there of dogs. He hunts some plots. He has some cur dogs. He has some leopards, I think. But Al really likes his Confederate heritage and has been very much involved with preservation of the cemeteries and all that. So, well, Chuck, this has been an enjoyable visit, and I really hope that we've been at it here about an hour and 3 minutes here in the world headquarters for Gone to the Dogs. The lady that runs this place is not here, and our dog is not happy about something. I don't know if you can hear him in the background.
I can't.
Well, that's good because there's about a 20-pound dachshund that runs this place. He's a black and tan, He looked like a hound, but he's got long hair. But anyway, I hear Louie back there telling me we better cut this one short for now. But I do want to give you the opportunity. Is there something that you'd like to talk about that we haven't discussed today?
I'll just throw this out there. So I'm here at the Fort Benning area, work on the post as a contractor. I'm sure plenty of your readers spread across the United States know somebody or will know somebody that joins the Army, goes to base training. If you ever have a family member and they're stationed at Fort Benning, going through training here, get them in contact with me. I'm on social media. And have them call me. I'll either take them fishing, I'll take them coon hunting, I'll take them to church, I'll take them to eat barbecue. And if they grew up coon hunting, I will definitely I'll put them in the woods and put them with a dog.
Well, that's a great invitation, guys out there. Listen up. He's on Facebook as Charles Pew Dell. That's spelled Pudil. And come to the Coon Hunting Conversations page, and you'll see Chuck's writings. I hope that you'll continue to write, Chuck, because they're very much enjoyed. And I definitely would like to get back with you again. I'm sure you've got a lot more stories to tell. I do want to publicly thank you for your service, and especially also to thank you for the work that you're doing with the young people. It's critical. It's absolutely critical that we save this country, and we're going to do it by winning the hearts and minds of those young people. And I just thank you so much for coming on today, Chuck, and wish you a great day. And hunting down there in those Georgia swamps, just watch out for those snakes and the gators. I face the same thing down here in Florida, so I know what you're up against.
Well, huge thanks for having me on, and I look forward to meeting you in person. You got an open invite to come here and hunt, go see the Infantry Museum with me, or just go get a meal.
Well, I'm going to call you before the next time, and that probably will be just before Labor Day. If you're going to be around, I'll give you drop you a text or a call, and we'll try to get together for a cup of coffee or whatever, and I'll certainly look forward to that. Folks, that's going to wrap up our podcast for today. Really pleased to have our guest, Charles Pew Dell from Georgia. It's been a great guest for us. I will remind you that I do have copies of Gone to the Dogs, A Coon Hunter's Journey. They are available on my website, stevefielderbooks.com. There are also a few of the trucker or ball cap style hats with the Gone to the Dog logo. If anyone asks you, where's Steve Fielder, you'll be pretty safe if you tell him, well, he's gone to the dogs.